Hello, my science lovers. This is the next episode of my ScientistMel short series, where this particular series, we're going to take the longer version of the science of content and smush it down into science that's for people who are short on time. So this episode, we're talking about social media addiction. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this episode of ScientistMel Short, social media addiction. What I'm going to cover are the signs and symptoms, research, and the personality types that we see associated with social media addiction. So the first thing we have to do is talk about what addiction is. According to the American Psychiatry Association and the Psychological Association, they discuss addiction as follows. Addiction is a chronic disorder with biological, psychological, social, and environmental factors influencing its development and maintenance. About half the risk for addiction is genetic, and people with addiction who have severe substance use disorder have an intense focus on using a certain substance or performing a particular behavior to the point to where it takes over their life. So you have to think, it's a chronic disorder. It's intense focus on a thing. 50% of the risk is genetic, and it takes over your life. So what we need to do is kind of break this down a bit more. Let me talk a bit about genetics. Genes have an effect on the degree of reward individuals experience when initially using a particular thing. It could be a drug or engaging in behaviors like gambling and social media. The way the body processes drugs also has an effect on addiction. There's a strong desire to re-experience the use of a substance or behavior, and potential influences are psychological, like stress or your history of trauma, social, family or friends' use of a substance or engagement in a behavior, and environmental factors, how easily you can get the substance and low cost. These factors can lead to regular use, and chronic use or exposure can lead to brain changes. Brain changes include areas of the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system regions. Now, the limbic system controls reward, motivation, memory, impulse control, and judgment. These changes in the brain can lead to substantial increases in cravings for a particular thing. This also leads to impairing the ability to control this impulse, even though an addict knows that the consequences of their addictive behavior could be negative. They can't control the ability to stop that craving. So this is a real thing that happens, and it's a problem for a lot of individuals. So let's talk a bit about this reward system. Positive response from people on a particular thing you post, you're going to get rewards from that, whether a comment, picture, or video fires off the reward system in the brain. So these likes, hearts, these instant gratification, for some, this can be quite addictive. The boost of those likes, those hearts, and positive comments, and some people fire off the reward system, giving them a high that they want to maintain and re-experience. Now keep in mind, social media is a constant stream. There is no natural off cue. It's not like picking up a book and reading it and getting to the end of a chapter and going, oh, I can stop now. Or in traditional television, not binge watching, you might reach the end of an episode and then you have to wait a day or a week for the next episode. So that's the natural off cue. Social media doesn't have this. So there is that instant reward that you can get anytime, day, morning, noon, or night, or in the wee hours of the morning. The part of the brain that we're discussing is the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. So anytime we have a particular stimuli that rewards us, it fires off that dopamine and it gives us a high that we sometimes want to re-experience. Now I'm posting a graph here, and this comes to us from Statista. They're an organization that does research in regards to online behaviors from individuals. Now I take this graph with a little bit of grain of salt because, I mean, look at the age range. We're talking 13 to 64. But the majority of those individuals spend the most time on social networks. I imagine there's going to be varying degrees depending on particular demographics within an age group. Gender might play a role, as well as economic in social status. So, but the point being is social networks is pretty high. I wonder what this other group is. They didn't actually tell you what this other group is right off on that particular website. And if you are curious about my particular sources and stuff, fear not. I post all of these slides with my sources, links to them, so you can dive in a bit further and check things out and kind of read a bit more on it. All right, so let's talk more about internet addiction. There are neurological complications as well as psychological disturbance and social problems along with internet addiction disorder. So substantial research has been done on internet addiction disorder in picking apart this type of addiction. It is yet to be included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as DSM. The only behavioral addiction included in the latest version is gambling disorder, yet internet gaming disorder was included in a section of the DSM version 5, recommending that it further be studied. Another thing to think about, screen time is not a good gauge of whether or not somebody's addicted to the internet. A review of literature in 2011 showed that SNSs, social networking sites, are predominantly used for social purposes. And personality types use it differently, and there are negative effects associated with it if you have social issues in academic performance. Now, most of the people who use social networking sites are trying to maintain offline networks. Extroverts appear to use them for social enhancement. Introverts use it for social compensation, each of which appears to be related to a greater usage, as does low conscientiousness and high narcissism. So narcissists use this. We're going to talk a bit more about that in a second. The negative correlates of SNS usage show a decrease in real-life social community participation, a decline in academic achievement, and there are relationship problems associated with this type of addiction. So if these are issues that you're having, this could be indicative of a potential addiction. There was another study done to develop what we call the Bergen Facebook Addiction Scale. And what they did is they took a pool of 18 items, 3 of which reflected each of the 6 core elements of addiction: salience, mood modification, tolerance, withdrawal, conflict, and relapse. This was constructed and administered to 423 students together with several other standardized self-report scales. And what they found was that the reliability was pretty high in determining whether or not somebody was addicted to Facebook. So again, when we talk about personality types use it for different reasons, extroverts use it to enhance their social life. Introverts use it to kind of compensate for social interactions. Narcissists are a brand all to themselves. They tend to be addicts because gratification builds ego. It's easy to develop a fantasy world on social networking sites, and it's easy to get instant gratification and make yourself feel good for your fake world. So narcissists tend to feed quite a bit on social networking sites. So what about symptoms and diagnosis? Anxiety and depression, social issues, intense desire, you have to have it, you have withdrawal without it. These are not much different than other addiction criteria. So when we're talking about diagnosing and how we go about finding out, am I addicted to social media or the internet? Well, thing is are you preoccupied with it? Do you think about previous online activity or try to think about what your next online session is going to be? Do you need to use it? Do you need to use social networking sites or the internet with increased amounts in order to achieve satisfaction? Do you find yourself increasing the amount of time that you're on the internet or working on social networking sites? Have you tried to cut back and you can't? That's another thing. Are you restless, moody, depressed, irritable? Do you attempt to cut down internet use or your social networking use and you become depressed or irritable through that process? Have you stayed online on a particular site, on a social networking site, longer than you originally intended? So at least those plus one of the following has to be present. So you need all 5 of those things plus one of these other 3 things. The other 3 things are All right, you ready? Have you jeopardized or risked the loss of a significant relationship, job, education, or career opportunity because of your time on social media or the internet? Have you lied to your family members, therapists, or other friends to conceal how much you are on the internet or on a social networking site? And do you use the internet as a way, or do you use social networking sites as a way to escape from your problems? Reliving some kind of dysphoric mood, relieving that type of mood, guilt, anxiety, depression. It's one thing to vent on a social networking site. It's another thing to vent on a social networking site and feel like you have to have it in addition to increased amount of time. You can't cut back. You can't take a day or two off, and then it affects your mood when you do. These are what you have to think about. If you don't suffer those things, then you're not addicted. Well, at least I don't think you are. But if you want to get more information, talk to a therapist about it or an expert. So essentially, what are we looking at? Science still needs to step up on its research in regards to social media addiction. If you feel you need help or suffer any symptoms of addiction, therapy is always a good way to gain insight as to what you need in order to feel better. Unplugging from social media is not so easy, especially if you are a person who has used it and to be your primary source of information, especially for younger generations who have always had this media form. Older generations haven't always had this, and so they're okay not having it. Younger generations have had it their entire lives, and so it's just not so easy to unplug, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. Studies have shown that removing smartphones, internet, and social media altogether is detrimental to certain individuals, especially if they were brought up with this media form and have had it incorporated daily into their lives. The younger generations, for example. And introverts use it as social compensation. So, what do we do here? The key to keep in mind is that high use of internet social media does not mean an addiction. If you feel you want to cut back and cannot, this might be a sign to start self-assessing. Addiction means it rules your life. If social media does not cause you to neglect the rest of your life, you are not addicted. So that brings us to the end of this particular talk. We've talked about the signs and symptoms, research, personality types, all of these things we've discussed in this particular episode. Here is my ginormous list of sources. I know you can't possibly read that, so what I've done is I've put this on my website, ScientistMel.com, so you don't have to worry about reading all of that and trying to retain it. Just go to my website under resources and you'll find it there. So I'm going to take a moment to thank all of my patrons. Tony, James, Lauren, Jen, Carl, Melanie, Patrick, Daniel, Paula, Tim, Carrie, Cersei, Keith, Zachary, Tony, Graham, Dragnot, Godless Iowan, Jennifer, and then we got Corey and Heavy. I also have a new person that's just upped on Patreon, so I'm going to give them a shout out. I think this is their first shout out to me, at least it's Stephen Fry. I need to add you to my list, Stephen. I haven't forgotten about you, but I got you on there. Thank you for being a patron, and if you like what I do, buy me a coffee. And if you can't contribute to a monthly commitment, even at just $1 a month, I have a paypal.me/ScientistMel. Where else can you find me? Everywhere on the internet. ScientistMel.com is where you can go to find all of my sources in addition to articles and other resources to help you dive a bit further. And I even have quizzes on there if you want to test your knowledge. Patreon.com/ScientistMel. All of my patrons get access to exclusive content in addition to rewards. I'm on Periscope, YouTube, and Facebook. And this has been the Science of Social Media Addiction Shorts version. And I forgot to show everybody all of my super awesome patrons. So I'm going to go back here. There you go. And I'm going to add Steven to this list. Tony, James, Lauren, Jen, Carl, Melanie, Patrick, Daniel, Paula, Tim, Carrie, Cersei, Keith, Zachary, Tony, Graham, Dragnot, Godless Iowan, Jennifer, Corey, Heavy. Add Steven to that list. This is where you can find me. I'm doing a redo. Because I forgot to change my camera angle. This isn't live This isn't live, ScientistMel. You've got to do better. But thank you so much to my science lovers. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe. If you have questions, throw them into the comments below. And share the love and the science love. Squishy science hugs. Thank you for being here. Bye. Have a great day.